Good morning, everybody watching this on Facebook Live. This is Alex with Chicagodetours again, checking in with all of you on a Saturday morning and looking to have some fun on another walking tour around some interesting parts of the city. So happy to have all of you joining in as you tune in the next couple of minutes here. As always, love to get comments and reactions. Feel free to let me know if you're having any issues. I've got my mask with me today. I mean, I always have it with me, but just let me know if you're having trouble hearing me or anything like that. Anyway, coming to you this morning to talk about some interesting stuff up in the corner of Lincoln Park. Lincoln Park is, it's where I am. It's where I did a tour a couple of weeks ago, walking around a couple of historic blocks in Lincoln Park. But this time, we're actually going to talk about the park itself, and we're going to talk about some of the monumental memorials and artworks that are scattered around the intersection of of where Lincoln Park meets Diversey here on the north side of the city. So let's go ahead and get into exactly that. And also, by the way, Happy New Year, everybody. Glad to be ringing in 2021 with all of you. Hope that the start of your new year has been an excellent one, and here's to a good time. All right, so wanted to kick things off with a building that we had briefly seen on one of my walks a couple of weeks ago, but I figured it was worth a nice full screen view. This is the Elks Memorial Lodge and Headquarters. Beautiful structure right here at the intersection of Cannon Drive and Diversey in the Lincoln Park neighborhood. Kind of walking around so you can get a nice perspective on it. This Beaux-Arts work is constructed in the 1920s as a memorial to the members of the Fraternal Order of the Elks who were killed in World War I. This is done in the Roman style, very obviously based on something like the Pantheon in Rome, for example. It's got a whole bunch of beautiful work on it. In fact, I'm going to cross the street really quickly so we can take a closer view at some of it here. Jaywalking. Nobody tell on me. So here we go. It's I don't think they've really been open for much in the past few months here, obviously, but typically this place allows visitors quite frequently. Can see that beautiful construction there, the columns, and there's that wonderful decorative frieze that runs around the base of the rotunda, showing allegorical works. There's also these monumental bronze statues of elks that you can find on either side of the entranceway right here. Here we go. My son, he just turned 4. He always likes walking past these and telling me about the deer that he can see here. So this is actually, like I said, this is built as a war memorial in the 1920s for the members of the Elks who passed away in World War I. It was rededicated to members of that fraternal organization who died in the succeeding American wars, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and then all soldiers who died in American wars eventually. And it's actually the headquarters of the Benevolent and Protective Order of the Elks of the United States. There's our other elk. And it's a city landmark, as you can see from the plaque right there. It's a beautiful structure. The interior of it is really remarkable. Space that, to my mind, stands toe-to-toe with something like the Cultural Center in downtown Chicago. And it's working in that same style of architecture, of course. I had mentioned this is Beaux-Arts. Beaux-Arts is the style of architecture most common in the United States between the 1880s, 1890s, really popularized by the 1893 World's Fair, before tapering off in the 1910s and 20s as modernist movements like Art Deco and then the international style pick up force. So this is kind of, it's almost like a last call for that style of architecture, the Elks Memorial Lodge here, but it does form a nice set of Beaux-Arts architecture along the lakefront. There's this up here in Lincoln Park. If you go downtown, the Field Museum and the Shed Aquarium are Beaux-Arts architecture, and then the original Field Museum, what's now the Museum of Science and Industry, which is left from the famous 1893 World's Fair. That's that same style of architecture as well. All right, swinging back over here, I'm right at the intersection of Diversey, Sheridan, and Cannon Drive here. And I wanted to point out, Diversey is unique of these intersections because Diversey is actually a boulevard. It's part of the official citywide boulevard system. I'll look down it right here. But it is not nearly as wide as the other boulevards. You compare this to like King Boulevard, the Midway Plaisance, the boulevards over in the Logan Square area. This is nothing like them at all. Well, that's because Diversey here, and I'll kind of tell this story as I walk in the opposite direction. Diversey was designated a boulevard back when that system is being created in the 1860s. That's when there's this idea, sort of inspired, I believe, by similar concepts in New York, Boston, other growing American cities at that time, of creating a public park space for the people of Chicago, so that people who are coming here to work in big heavy industries like steel, meatpacking, stuff like that, they don't have to spend their entire lives in cramped, crowded, maybe unpleasant tenement apartments, things like that. So you create big public parks like Lincoln Park, which I'm walking through right now. Actually, I just realized I wanted to show you something right over here. And you connect all of them with boulevards. It was called an emerald necklace around the city of Chicago. Diversey was supposed to be the northern part of that system. It was supposed to connect the northern edge of Lincoln Park over to Logan Square, which is being developed at that same time, the 1860s. But local landowners in this area at the time were mostly working class Germans. They didn't want to have to pay the extra taxes for widening and beautifying Diversey right here. And so it never happened. By the time, excuse me, by the time they went through all of the lawsuits and finally got things in the proper shape, it was already too built up around here and there was no possibility of widening it any further. For evidence of that, take a look. This is on a display. This shows you exactly where we're standing right here. This what was originally the northwest corner of Lincoln Park. Diversey is the street right here, running off east to west towards the lake. And this was supposed to be as grand a space as something like the Midway Plaisance down on the south side, connecting Jackson and Washington parks in the middle of the University of Chicago's campus. Didn't come to be because this area, despite its reputation today, wasn't interested in that sort of project at that time. Now, because, though, it was the original northern terminus of Lakeshore Drive, the intersection right over here where you see those buses waiting, that's where Lakeshore Drive originally dead-ended before it was expanded in the 1880s, and then again in the 1930s, is home to some really interesting works of art. Right across the street from me here, I'll run over so you can take a look at it, is a memorial, a monument to the German writer Goethe. Now, you'll probably note as I walk up to it right here, this does not look much like Hermann Goethe. This artwork here, and hopefully it's not too washed out in our presentation, is a sort of idealized vision of what Goethe's work meant to his readers. The inscription on the base of it says, to Goethe, the mastermind of the German people, from the Germans of Chicago in 1913. Can see him kind of standing with his eagle up against the building by the German-American architect Mies van der Rohe right there. This was actually pretty widely ridiculed when it was first created because it was so over the top, so ostentatious. It's become sort of a local curiosity, especially since many Chicagoans, of course, like Americans of all stripes, don't necessarily know how to pronounce Goethe as they walk past it. But it definitely does stand out here, especially with the more modern buildings surrounding it. And it also had a little bit of a controversial history. If you can see the inscription right here, this is constructed in 1913. Well, a year later, not Chicago, but the United States enters World War I. Well, not a year later, but a year later, World War I begins. Eventually, the United States enters that war, fighting against the German Empire, which was actually sort of the end of a lot of the prominent German sort of cultural traditions here in Chicago. It was Lincoln Park and Lakeview were the homeland of a huge German community back in the late early 1900s. But that community, to prove that they were patriotic Americans, really kind of buried that national and ethnic heritage. There's only a few traces of it left in these neighborhoods, the fact that these used to be German working class communities. There's the Goethe statue, obviously. There's a gym a little ways down, Diversity from here. I think it's the Lincoln Park Athletic Center or something like that. But that's inside an old Turnverein facility. The Turners were this German group that advocated for athletics and social organization and stuff like that. And there's a couple of other old businesses kind of scattered around Lincoln Park and Lakeview that are tied to that earlier time when this was Germania, really. The most famous one might be up at the intersection of Lincoln and Belmont. There's a German bakery that's been there for decades and decades, even as late as the 1960s, 1970s. If you went shopping in Lincoln Park or Lakeview, especially if it was away from the lakefront, more on the western side of the neighborhoods, the odds were pretty good that the folks talking with you would be fluent in both German and English, because those were the lingua franca of the neighborhood. All right, so I've been trotting along over here to come over and take a look at another one of the works of art that pepper this corner of the park here. Let me turn you around. That is a statue dedicated to a person I had mentioned 2 weeks ago, John Peter Altgeld. He was he was a bit of a Renaissance man, had his finger in a lot of different pies. But he's most famous because he was governor of Illinois in the 1890s, and he was quite a popular governor when he was first elected. He was a progressive Republican, a reformer, trying to clean up the state. And he's very fondly remembered for a lot of the work that he did at that time. But notably, he only served one term in office and left under a cloud of controversy, to say the least, because he pardoned 3 people who had been convicted of the bombing of the Haymarket back in the 1880s. If you know your Chicago history or your labor history, you probably know that the Haymarket affair is an event where there were essentially an event where a bomb was set off during a clash between labor protesters, including some radical ones, and the Chicago police. It exploded in the midst of the police. Chicago police started firing into the crowds. Nobody even knows how many people wound up being killed. And the Chicago state's attorney really just used it as an excuse to go after radical organizers, and especially ones from Germany and other immigrant communities. They wound up indicting a bunch of anarchists and labor leaders for a conspiracy to bomb the Haymarket, despite not really finding any proof that any of these guys had done anything. And so that is a miscarriage of justice today, widely regarded as such. And you can find a monument to all the victims of the Haymarket in the Fulton Market area, including the people who were executed. But Altgeld thought that 3 of the still surviving prisoners were clearly innocent, that there hadn't been enough proof, so he pardoned them. But that did not match the sort of political moment of his time, and so he left office after only one term. Nobody wanted to touch him with a 10-foot pole. He went back into private practice as a lawyer, lived in this area. If you remember 2 weeks ago, I showed you the Brewster apartment building. That's where he lived over here before passing away only a couple of years after leaving office. But as the decades went past, and sort of that moment was as sort of the paranoia from that moment faded into memory, Altgeld's reputation rebounded to the point that by 1914, only a dozen years after he had died, he was viewed as one of the great figures in the state's history, and that's why we have the statue to him with the huddled masses, you might say, kind of sheltering next to him, stuck in the park here. When that's opened up, this is still very close to a very prominent position, I should say. These days, it's kind of hidden back there. If I turn around and show you where I was standing, it's kind of in this grove of trees, hidden between Cannon Drive and the Fullerton. You can't even see it back there, but it's hidden back there. There it is, off in the distance. So it's not all that easy to find anymore unless you know where to look for it. But it is a great story. It's attached to it, and I think Altgeld deserves the reputation he has today as one of the leading lights of Illinois' political history. All right, crossing Cannon Drive once again. I want to point out really quickly, Cannon Drive here, kind of curving off in that direction. I'll swivel over here. That's where we started a couple of minutes ago. That's the original Lakeshore Drive. Lakeshore Drive, as I showed you on that map, originally ended at that intersection of Diversey and what's now Cannon and Sheridan. But it was pushed out to the lakefront in the 1880s, expanded even further in the 1930s. And so today, the old Lakeshore Drive is actually Cannon Drive, where a lot of buses and other vehicles coming from downtown sort of end their commute. Wanted to point out a couple of other interesting things about this little neck of the woods. Taken many walks here over the years, so I'm trying to show you all the interesting little nooks and crannies within just a few minutes walk here. Coming over here, this is looking towards North Pond in Lincoln Park. There's this bowl-shaped depression in the middle of the park that we're looking down into, filled with frozen water right now from the nasty weather we've had for the past couple of days. But you can see how the land kind of rises to the right, rises again to the left with what must be an artificial hill behind the playground over there, and then with North Pond straight ahead of us off into the distance. This is obviously been modified an awful lot by Chicago Park District construction in the past 100+ years, and you can see Hancock Center way off in the distance there if you're looking carefully. This is actually also evidence of how the lakefront itself has shifted and changed. The ridge that's on the right-hand side here, kind of heading the sort of elevation that heads towards the towers and the other streets here, that's one of the ancient shorelines of Lake Michigan. If I'd been doing this live streaming walk around the neighborhood a couple of thousand years ago, I probably would have been standing on a sandbar in the middle of Lake Michigan, freezing my feet off, considering the time of year. The lake had already receded by the time the city of Chicago wound up getting built up in the 1800s, but it's been pushed out even further. It's still way off in the distance over there. It's probably not quite visible, but Lakeshore Drive, carrying its load of cars, and I'm sure people jogging and biking, is about a quarter mile to our east here. So all of the land between here and Lakeshore Drive is artificial landfill or the lake receding over the past couple of thousand years. All right, one last thing I wanted to show off to you right here before we wrap things up in a minute. This is one of the last of our little trio of statues in this little corner of the park. We have a newly refurbished monument to everybody's favorite Broadway star, Alexander Hamilton, sitting on a little pedestal, I should say, right here in Lincoln Park. There you see Alexander Hamilton looking away from us. He actually, he just got refurbished. The plating on him was just shined up, so he really, the gold really shines right here. And they actually turned him around when they reinstalled him. He used to be facing that way, back towards the city, but they moved him so that he faces towards the intersection these days. So now you have Alexander Hamilton identified both by his butt as well as by his face, as you see right here. And as the inscription says, this is a gift from Kate Sturgis Buckingham. She is the woman who donated the money for the Buckingham Fountain in downtown Chicago. She was a major donor to the art scene in Chicago in the early 20th century, and she thought that Hamilton at the time was underappreciated as one of the major figures in early American history, and she wanted a monument to him to be constructed here in Chicago. The money for that wound up sitting in sort of in escrow for a couple of decades after Buckingham passed away, but eventually her estate put together the funding to have the statue constructed. It was actually on a very different pedestal originally. You can find images of it online, including on the Park District's website, but it used to be on like a 50-foot tall granite monolith standing here in the park, but they found that was not structurally sound in the 1990s, so they took it down and replaced it with this much smaller pedestal right here. One small touch I do always like every year for the Hamilton statue here is that they always plant palm fronds around the statue here every summertime, since Hamilton himself was born in the Caribbean. I forget where. Barbados? somewhere in the Caribbean. But anyway, it's their little nod to his Caribbean heritage there. They plant those palm fronds in the little garden that surrounds this spot right here. All right, so that's been my little jaunt around this corner of Lincoln Park today. I'll be spending the next week thinking about where I want to wander next Saturday morning. Hope you all enjoyed being with me this morning. As always, you can find fun stuff like this on our website. We've got some fun virtual events coming up this month in January about the 1893 World's Fair and about Chicago's food history. We are always available if you want to reach out about creating something with us as a sort of exclusive event. And at some point, I don't know if we have the dates set in the stone, but we're going to be doing a revamped version of our Chicago architecture crash course at some point this summer. So you can look forward to all of that coming from Chicago Detours in the next couple of months here. And we actually, we just wrote this past week about what 2020 was like for a company that's in the business of tourism in the midst of a pandemic. So you can find that on our website at chicagodetours.com. All of that said, thank you for hanging out with me this morning. Hope everyone has a happy new year, and yeah, have a great one.